Imagine walking past your snake plant one morning, the same plant that has been sitting quietly in your home for years, and suddenly noticing something you never expected to see. From the center, a long stalk has appeared, carrying small white flowers that release a sweet fragrance at night. In that instant, one question takes over your mind. What just happened? Because a snake plant almost never blooms. Some people keep one for 15 or 20 years without ever seeing a single flower. That is why when it finally happens, the question is not just why, but what it means. Why would a plant known for endurance, simplicity, and silence suddenly do something so rare and so delicate? That is the mystery at the center of this story. And what makes it even more fascinating is that two very different explanations both try to answer it. On one side, there are spiritual traditions and old household beliefs passed down through generations. On the other, there is science, with its explanations about plant maturity, environmental signals, and reproduction. At first, those two paths seem completely separate, but the deeper you go, the more surprising the connection becomes. Both of them lead to the same conclusion. Today, we are going to uncover why the snake plant blooms, what many cultures believe that bloom revealed about a home, and why the scientific explanation may be just as remarkable as the spiritual one. And once you see how those pieces fit together, you may never look at this plant the same way again. Part 1. Why this rare bloom feels so unusual. To understand why this moment feels so extraordinary, you first have to understand the kind of plant the snake plant is. Also known as Sansevieria or St. George's sword, it is one of the most popular houseplants in the world because it can survive almost anything. You find it in offices, bathrooms, kitchens, bedrooms, and living rooms. It tolerates low light, mist waterings, and shifts in temperature with very little complaint. That is exactly why so many people love it. It is the perfect plant for anyone who says they are not naturally good with plants. But that is where the mystery begins. With all that toughness, with all that quiet endurance, a snake plant blooming is something extraordinarily rare. Some people keep one for 15 or 20 years and never see a single flower. Others have one for only 3 years, and then suddenly a thin stalk appears, carrying tiny white or cream-colored blooms with a sweet fragrance that becomes stronger at night. That kind of rarity immediately raises a deeper question. Why does it bloom at that exact moment? What triggered it? Is it just chance, or is something more meaningful happening? That question has fascinated gardeners, spiritual thinkers, and scientists for years. And what makes the mystery even more compelling is this. Both the spiritual explanation and the scientific explanation point toward the same final idea, even though they arrive there from completely different directions. But to understand that, we first have to look at what older traditions believed about this plant. Because in many cultures, the snake plant was never seen as just another decorative houseplant. Part 2. The snake plant as a silent protector. Long before people tried to explain this bloom through biology, many traditions across the Americas, Africa, and Asia saw the snake plant as something far more meaningful than a simple decorative plant. In many homes in the Americas, especially in the southern United States and among families that kept strong folk traditions, the snake plant was placed behind the front door like an invisible shield against envy, bad intentions, and harmful energy. Its tall, upright leaves, pointing straight upward, were seen as protective blades capable of cutting negative forces before they could enter the home. And there was a certain logic to that belief, because the shape of the plant itself seemed to support it. Those sharp vertical leaves were understood in some energetic traditions as carrying a cutting force, something that breaks up negativity before it settles into the spaces where a family lives. Other people placed the plant in the main bedroom to help preserve peace between couples. There was even an old belief that if a home was filled with frequent arguments, putting a snake plant in the room where the couple slept could help restore harmony within 3 cycles of the full moon. Whether you believe in lunar cycles or not, there is an interesting connection hidden inside that tradition. The plant releases oxygen at night and helps improve the air while people are sleeping. Better sleep can mean less irritability, fewer tensions, and fewer conflicts. In other words, tradition and science may be describing the same outcome in two very different languages. But when the snake plant blooms, the meaning becomes even more powerful. If the plant was already seen as a guardian of the home, then what does it mean when that guardian suddenly flowers? That is where the older traditions become even more striking. Part 3. In African traditions, the bloom was never random. In African traditions where this plant originates, the flowering of a snake plant is often seen as a direct sign of prosperity and protection. It is not viewed as a random event or a botanical accident. In that way of seeing the world, the plant is responding to the energy of the home itself. If it blooms, it means the place where it lives has reached such a high level of harmony that the plant recognizes it and responds by producing a flower. And there is a detail here that makes this belief even more powerful. In villages in West Africa, when a snake plant bloomed, it was not something people casually noticed and then forgot. The family would tell the neighbors, mark the date, and in some cases even gather to watch the flowers open at night. That bloom meant the household had reached something uncommon. It meant the space was protected, not only physically, but spiritually as well. It meant the ancestors approved of the way that family was living. It was not treated as empty superstition. It was understood as a visible recognition of social and environmental harmony inside the home. In this interpretation, the flower is almost like a message made visible. The plant is no longer just surviving in a corner of the house. It is answering the atmosphere around it. It is revealing that something about the environment has become balanced, favorable, and deeply supportive of life. That is why the bloom carried so much emotional weight. It was seen as confirmation that the home itself was in a good state. And that belief did not stop in Africa. As the plant spread and families carried these ideas with them, the meaning of the bloom continued to evolve in other places, especially in the American South. Part 4. In the American South, the bloom became a sign of financial blessing. In the United States, especially across the southern states where this plant thrives in warm and humid conditions, there is a tradition passed down through generations, particularly in African American communities that preserve ties to those older African roots. In that tradition, when a snake plant blooms, it means an economic blessing is coming into the household. It might be a business finally starting to succeed, a debt finally getting paid off, or an unexpected opportunity arriving at the door. What makes this part of the story so striking is how specific the pattern became in family memory. In the source text, people who had cared for snake plants for decades in places like Georgia and Louisiana described seeing the same thing again and again. Whenever a snake plant bloomed in someone's home, something financially positive often happened within the following 3 to 6 months. It could be a promotion, an inheritance, a successful deal, or a legal matter turning out in the family's favor. After seeing that pattern repeat enough times, it stopped feeling like a vague belief and became part of family history. One woman from New Orleans even remembered her grandmother's snake plant blooming in 1985, and 4 months later, her grandfather, who had been out of work for a year, found a job that supported the family for the next 20 years until retirement. For her grandmother, the meaning was simple. The plant had sensed prosperity before the family did. Whether someone calls that coincidence or correlation, the important point is that the bloom was never seen as meaningless. It was remembered as a sign that something favorable was already beginning to move inside the life of that home. Part 5. The bloom as a celebration of a home in balance. In indigenous wisdom in the Americas, especially among communities in the Southwest that adopted the plant after it was introduced to the continent in the late 19th century, similar patterns were noticed. People observed that the snake plant tended to bloom in homes where there was stability, where people made time for reflection, and where the space was cared for with intention. Some groups that incorporated many non-native plants into their knowledge systems referred to it as the plant of upright energy because its vertical growth represented integrity, strength, and moral steadiness. When it bloomed, that was taken to mean those qualities were being honored inside the home. One elder in the source text explained it in a powerful way. He said the plant stands like a warrior, always upright, always alert. And when a warrior has done its duty well, when the village is safe and prosperous, then it can celebrate. The flower is the plant's celebration. It means the work of protection has been fulfilled and the home is safe. There is also another striking detail connected to West African belief. In that tradition, the snake plant is said to carry a guardian spirit. When it blooms, that spirit is active, awake, and visibly protecting the family. The flower is not just decoration. It is the way that presence reveals itself. And this is where the story takes an even more revealing turn. Because once you move from these spiritual readings into feng shui, you begin to see a new framework that sounds very different on the surface, yet somehow arrives at a very similar conclusion. Part 6. What feng shui says the bloom reveals. In feng shui, the snake plant holds a very special place. Within this practice, which has become extremely popular in interior design in the United States over the last few decades, the plant is understood as a source of rising yang energy. Its tall vertical leaves create an upward movement, which is why it is often recommended for stagnant corners, home entrances, and spaces where the energy feels heavy or blocked. But when a snake plant blooms, the interpretation becomes much more unusual. In feng shui, the flower is seen as a sign that good fortune has already been activated in that space. It does not mean luck is about to arrive. It means the environment has already been cleared, balanced, and aligned. The plant is confirming that negative energy has been reduced and that harmony, stability, and good intention are now present in the home. In that sense, the bloom works almost like an energetic reading made visible. The location of the bloom also matters. If the snake plant flowers near the main entrance, it suggests strong protection over the household and a clear path for prosperity to enter. If it blooms in a living room or shared space, it points to family harmony being especially strong. And if it blooms in a bedroom, it is interpreted as a sign of emotional balance and inner peace for the person sleeping there. What makes this so fascinating is that feng shui does not really contradict science. Instead, it describes in energetic language what science will later describe in environmental terms. And that is where the mystery becomes even more compelling, because once the scientific explanation begins, you realize the conditions that lead this plant to bloom are almost exactly the same conditions these older systems describe as harmony. Part 7, what science says actually triggers the bloom. Now comes the scientific side, and this is where everything starts to lock into place. Botanically, the flowering of Sansevieria trifasciata happens only under very specific conditions. The first requirement is maturity. We are not talking about a young plant that is 1 or 2 years old. A snake plant usually needs to reach a sufficient level of development, often somewhere between 3 and 10 years, depending on how it was previously grown, before it is even capable of flowering. But maturity alone is not enough. The plant also needs what horticultural explanations describe as mild environmental stress. That point is essential to the entire mystery. This stress is not destructive. It is a biological signal that tells the plant conditions are right for reproduction. A moderate reduction in watering can imitate the beginning of a dry season. Roots becoming slightly crowded inside the pot can tell the plant it has already used much of its available space and resources. A difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures can signal a seasonal shift. Taken together, those changes tell the plant something important. Conditions are changing, so now is the moment to reproduce. That response makes perfect sense when you remember where the plant comes from. In its native habitat in West Africa, flowering happens during transitional seasons, when dry and wet periods begin to shift. Those environmental changes trigger reproduction because that is when seed dispersal and survival have the best chance. The plant does not bloom randomly, it blooms strategically, and that may be the most remarkable point of all. When a snake plant blooms in your home, it means that through your care and through the conditions of your space, you have somehow recreated those same natural transition signals far from the plant's place of origin. In many cases, the people whose plants bloom are not following some secret technique. They are simply caring for the plant in rhythms that happen to match the triggers the plant evolved to respond to. Part 8. The final connection between harmony and bloom. What brings everything together is the idea that the snake plant blooms when its environment becomes favorable enough for it to shift from survival into reproduction. The source text explains that this plant is widely known for helping purify indoor air, and that it is one of the few plants that uses CAM photosynthesis, meaning it opens its pores at night and releases oxygen while people sleep. The important connection is this. A plant that is constantly working to process its environment is using energy to do so. When the surroundings become stable and healthy enough, less of that energy is spent on survival, and more of it can be redirected toward flowering. That is why the scientific explanation ends up sounding so close to the spiritual one. Science says the plant blooms when the air is good, the environment is stable, the light is right, the watering is balanced, and the plant experiences the kind of mild stress that activates reproduction. The older traditions say it blooms when the home has harmony, positive energy, and favorable conditions. Different language, same conclusion. The practical care follows that same logic. Bright indirect light for several hours a day helps. Seasonal variation in light helps even more. Letting the soil dry completely between waterings is essential because overwatering is the quickest way to weaken the plant and prevent blooming. A slightly crowded pot can help trigger the response. Mild temperature variation during cooler months can also help. A well-draining soil mix and balanced fertilizer in spring and summer matter, while fall and winter should be a period of rest. And above all, patience matters because flowering cannot be forced overnight. In the end, the bloom is brief, delicate, and easy to miss. But that is exactly what makes it meaningful. A plant famous for enduring neglect uses all of its strength for just a few days to create something beautiful. And maybe that is the final message in all of this. When the environment is right, life finds a way to bloom, too.